Have you ever noticed that everything Donald Trump touches turns to a big pile of steaming shit? It doesn't matter if we're talking about the economy, foreign policy, domestic policy, even something so simple as manners. It goes from being thriving and robust to a big stinking pile of caca.
So it's make Argentina great again. It's make Israel better. It's anything but America first. And now he's going to take away food stamps the whole month of November. And let me tell you what, 1 out of every 5 people that are on food stamps are veterans. They have fought for this country, and President Trump is punishing poor people for the No Kings rally. That's what he's doing. See, President Trump doesn't want to be president anymore. He wants to be the king. He's already established everything that he has to do. And look, you've seen what them young Republicans were writing, and you've seen that guy come out and say, well, this is just what all Republicans do and say behind the scenes. It's no big deal. This is how we all feel. They're all racist, male chauvinist, pedophiles, and now they want us to accept that. Look, President Trump's ratings are dropping like the rent on a burning building. He doesn't care that you don't agree with what he's doing. He's just going to start punishing the poorest of us all. And that's making America great.
Living in America right now feels like a punishment. You wake up already behind, you go to work just to stay broke, and you watch the cost of everything rise while your paycheck doesn't move an inch. Groceries are a luxury, rent is robbery, healthcare is a joke, and somehow we're the ones blamed for not budgeting better. People are working 2-3 jobs and still choosing between food or gas. Families are crammed into apartments because buying a house became a fantasy. You can't afford to get sick. You can't afford to rest. You can't afford to exist. But they keep telling us the economy is strong. Strong for who? Because it sure as hell isn't the people doing the work. We're out here treading water while billionaires build rockets, politicians trade stocks, and corporations raise prices just because they can. We were promised opportunity. We got survival. And what makes this worse is watching people blame themselves. Like somehow you failed because you can't afford a 1-bedroom anymore. Like you didn't do enough when the truth is the math just stopped adding up years ago. They told us to work harder, but never told us they'd change the finish line. This isn't a country full of lazy people. It's a country full of exhausted ones. Simple as that.
There's a certain outrage that is out there. The outrage is that white people are really, really furious that why is it that even everything that we try to do, it's always working against us? Today we're talking about the cut of snaps, food stamps, and all these, benefits that comes from the government. White people voted against all this, knowing that it's going to be affecting black people big time. It's going to be affecting the black community big time and all of the minorities that were also affected. Yes, it's true. It has affected black people. But let's look at who it has affected enormously. When you try to look at the United States stats, we see that a lot of white people are the primary people who benefit from all these snaps, right? And it's the truth. And so when we get to look at the choices and the consequences that comes after the choices that you chose, it means that you voted against yourself. You voted against everything that you may want. See, you might do something thinking that you are going to hurt somebody, but you end up hurting yourself way much harder. White farmers got their receipts. White constructors got their receipts. Today, we are seeing a lot of white people getting their receipts. They're getting the receipts of what they paid for. This is a price that they paid for. And they were ready that this was going to happen. And so, brothers and sisters, when we see all this happening, it is as a result of the poor choices. But again, the question, why are they so furious, learning that black people didn't even benefit so much from all these snaps at the end of the day? Because they thought that this all was going to be benefiting black people, only to realize that majority of them were also benefiting from these, brothers and sisters. So I'm going to let you watch the video and then I'll be back. I'm your number one presenter and host of Eugene Doc Stories. I'm happy to talk to you today to address this issue, and I hope you're just doing fine from different states that you're watching from. Hey, kindly check with me. Which state are you watching me from right? So let's get into it. I'll be back, and then I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. So let's watch the video. I'll be back.
I'm really starting to think that Trump is purposely trying to destroy the U.S. economy and get America to collapse the way the USSR did, so that him and his billionaire buddies can buy everything up for pennies on the dollar and turn us into a full-blown oligarchy the way Russia did after the USSR collapsed. That's the only thing that makes sense in my brain, because everything that he is doing is isolating America from its allies. He is destroying trade on the world stage with us and all of the people we do trade with. I mean, China's putting exports on restrictions on all of their rare earth exports at this point. There's literally nothing that he's done since he took office that is good for the American people or the American economy. Everything that he has done has been for billionaires and has been at the detriment of the U.S. as a country. Like, our entire workforce is being decimated now as he is sending a whole bunch of people out of the country who used to do jobs like construction and farming. So we're going to have a food shortage because there's not enough people picking the food. We're going to have a worse housing problem because there's not enough people building the houses. And it literally seems like everything that he is doing is just designed to destroy this country. And yet the MAGA people are still licking his boots. It's wild.
I'm at the point in my life where I feel like if this is not fucking rock bottom, I don't know what is. Because I told my director, I told everyone my situation. I have 6 days to figure out a second job, and then the job that I have now just cut me back to part-time. I have 3 kids. I'm about to be fucking homeless. And I don't know what to do. Like, I told them my situation, and they basically were like, let's kick this bitch while she's down. So now it looks like I'm going to be finding 2 jobs instead of just having to find another one. I feel like this is never going to get better. I fucking hate being an adult, and never in my life have I struggled this fucking bad, and this is the most money that I've ever made.
This isn't me trying to fearmonger, this is just me trying to prepare you. The US economy right now is like a Jenga tower with 18 fucking pieces missing. We are one piece pulled out away from everything just toppling down. AI was responsible for 40% of US GDP growth this past year and 80% of US stock growth. And the manufacturing industry has contracted for 7 consecutive months, while every other economic indicator is saying this is as bad as things have been since 2009. Now, when you have a sentence that says the economy is as bad as it's been since 2009, you are fucked. So again, this is not me fear-mongering, this is just me preparing you. Our economy is in a very bad place. If you have a job, hold on to it with everything you have.
America is falling behind. When an authoritarian regime attacks academia, science, news reporters, free speech, students, the best and the brightest leave. The same thing happened in Germany, in Russia, in Greece, and it's happening here. And this hurts the country because all of the talent is going elsewhere to help another country.
Bankruptcies are skyrocketing. Right now, more trucking companies are going bankrupt, more restaurants. Farm bankruptcies are up 35% higher than 2024. Hi, today is your update in the economy. It's October 12th, 2025. We are day 12 of the government shutdown. Our economy is collapsing every single day. Look at this. Airports are a disaster. Last time we had government shutdown in 2018, we lost $3 billion every week in travel alone. Let's not forget about the safety. Donald Trump fires over 4,000 government workers, and now museums and all that stuff in Washington are closed. Washington has an unemployment rate of 6% before the government shutdown. Expect a catastrophic crisis in Washington. We have lost over 1 million jobs this year. Inflation is 2.9%. Groceries are up 29%. We are in a recession in 22 states. We are in a recession in construction. We are in a recession in manufacturing. The stock market tanked on Friday, dropping 900 points. Drop a comment below if you want to stay on the algorithm to get your update on the economy and the stock market on Monday, October 13th.
I'm going to make a video that is very high level in finance, but needs to be redirected to as many eyeballs as possible, because this is eventually going to affect everyone, including yourself. And this is not a doom and gloom. This is simply just a high level overview of what is coming and what the impacts will have on your life. I've made videos about this stuff before, but they've been very in-depth. So I want to make a video that is much higher level overview to give everyone an understanding for themselves and how they can prepare. On August 11th, the United States national debt surpassed 37 trillion. Now, you might ask, well, why is this really important? Well, October 2025, or September, I guess you could say the end of September, is when the national debt, or essentially the fiscal year of 2025, ended. And we ended at a debt of 37.6 trillion, which means in a month and a half, we added another $600 billion to the national debt. The United States economy, when you look underneath the surface, it isn't doing too hot. Again, I'm not going to go into the weeds, but when you look into the data, it's really not actually doing that hot. And with that, we have 10 companies, 10 tech companies, that are keeping the economy, quote unquote, afloat. Problem with this is it's very much looking very bubblish, very 2001, very 1929-esque. Now, the problem with this is the United States government has way too much debt. We are at something called a debt to GDP ratio of 125%. I think it's a little more now, like 125.4%. The reality of the situation is, if the United States economy takes a turn downward because these companies aren't able to produce the results that they're essentially being invested into at the valuations that they have, or essentially you can put it in terms of like they're looking as shiny as they can be, and if they're not as shiny as they actually are, later down the road, then everything in the market could essentially pop. Now, the problem with this is the United States economy, or the United States government, has been a backstop. The United States government does not have the financial capability to backstop this bubble popping. And the genuine concern is that if this bubble pops, the United States government will not be able to fund. It will not be able to bring in the money that is able to then fund the government, the debt itself. And so typical things like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, the largest expenses to the government will have to start dwindling. Now, if this gets even more severe, how does this start to affect the socio-political sphere? And what if the money itself for things like subsidies of energy, like oil, or subsidies for things like food, what if that starts getting affected and farmers can't produce the food that we need, and oil companies can't produce the energy that we need, and we have essentially a sell-off and the inability to fuel the people that we have? What happens then? And genuinely, I would typically say, hey, the United States will be able to get through this. Humans have ingenuity, and we have the ability to see the problems, be able to work around the problems, create solutions to the problems. But the only caveat to this is when you have a problem, it tends to be something that's a little more concrete. But what we're talking about now is not a concrete problem. What we're talking about is a system failure. A point where the actual government, the entire thing that we know of collectively as what we all bank on as being secure, pops and it goes away. And that's the genuine concern. And so the spiral looks like this. The hype gets real in artificial intelligence that it's going to be able to boost productivity and help us grow out of the national debt. Then the productivity, the AI bubble pops instead of it being a real boom. And then that spirals over to the government not having the capital or the money to be able to fund the debt. And then the debt spirals, and then the debt causes the United States government to go insolvent. And then the entire populace turns into a socio-political, violent collapse. This definitely isn't a conversation you want to have over a dinner table. But again, more people need to be aware of this situation, because it is a process that is playing out right in front of our eyes. So let's talk about it now before the situation actually is around the corner.
The U.S. Department of Labor released a memo just a few days ago explaining that Donald Trump's policies are in fact already ruining your lives, but they're about to actually make your life so much worse, to the point where you may not even be able to purchase food. And again, this is coming from the United States Department of Labor under Donald J. Trump himself. His own Labor Department had to put out this memo or letter or whatever it is you want to call it to warn Americans that this guy is ruining your life. And of course, he's doing it, according to the Labor Department, by deporting all of the farm workers in the United States. We already have a massive shortage of labor on American farms. We have had farmers, representatives come out and tell us that. The farmers themselves have come out and told us that. We don't have people to go out there and do the work. To pick the crops, to till the fields, to plant the seeds. We don't have human beings to do that now because of Trump's policies, and a lot of those people voted for those policies. But as I've always said, I'm on the fence about sympathy, because when the farmers go under, all of us are affected. If it were just them suffering the consequences of their votes, you get what you vote for, right? But their suffering leads to suffering for all of us. So, we're all in the same boat on this one, because every human being on the planet has to have food to survive. And we're at a point, according to the Labor Department, you may not be able to afford it anymore. Here is what they said. The current and imminent labor shortage, exacerbated by the near total cessation of the inflow of illegal aliens, increased enforcement of existing immigration law, and global competitiveness pressures described below, presents a sufficient risk of supply shock-induced food shortages to justify immediate implementation. The lack of undocumented and documented workers results in significant disruptions to production costs and threatening the stability of domestic food production and prices for U.S. consumers.
All right, so SNAP is going away in November. There's no more money. I was at No Kings yesterday, and I was talking with a federal worker who runs a welfare office. And he was telling me that him and his staff have been training for de-escalation, because there are going to be some very angry people going to that office asking why their kids are going hungry. They're going to be very angry, and this is going to be people's breaking point. Like that's just all there is to it. And especially for November, when it's supposed to be a time about food, especially around Thanksgiving. So all I'm going to say is, if you see somebody grabbing up some food, trying to run away with it, no, you didn't. You didn't see shit. If you see somebody desperately trying to get food, you did not see a damn thing. You were paying attention to your children. You got focused on the products that you were browsing. You have a hard time hearing. I'm deaf in my left ear. I can't hear very well, especially directional hearing. My directional hearing is bad. Or maybe you're having some temporary blurry vision. You didn't see shit. You saw nothing.
I want us all on the same page. The reason there may not be any SNAP benefits in November is because Trump cut the budget to the USDA, which runs SNAP. Not only that, he basically gutted the emergency funding for SNAP. It went from billions of dollars to $500 million. Now, during Trumpy's first term, we had the longest shutdown in the history of this country, but SNAP benefits were never threatened. Why? Because the USDA was fully funded to include emergency measures, which paid for SNAP benefits. Now, millions of Americans may go without their SNAP benefits because of Trumpy's cuts. And remember, just a few months ago, they told us they were no longer going to report the status of hunger in this country. Because if you can't prove you're hungry, nobody's going to give a fuck.
Why aren't Americans out on the streets protesting Trump's policies like they do over in Europe? Well, I'll take a shot at answering that. I'm not an expert, but I have opinions on the subject. If you're willing to listen, I'm willing to share. To begin with, I think there's a significant group of Americans who are simply apathetic. They don't care. They're willing to let the next guy handle it. They don't want to stick their necks out. There is yet another group of Americans who are simply so beaten down by the struggle of day-to-day life in this country that they don't have the energy to care. If you're a banker, if you're an attorney, if you're an engineer or an architect, a medical professional, or if you're in one of the specialized trades like electrical or plumbing, you can make a very good life here. But if you're not, there's a good chance you're struggling. And when you come home at night after that second job, all you want to do is collapse on the couch and put your feet up. You don't want to go out marching. I think Americans tend to have a negative perception of protesters, probably stemming from the days of the Vietnam War, when college students were out in the streets clashing violently with police. Americans, despite all the braggadocio and bravado, are a fairly docile bunch of people. They do what they're told. Additionally, there can be negative consequences for protesting in this country. For example, American corporations are incredibly sensitive to how they are perceived in the public eye. If it became known that a group of their employees was out marching in the streets and waving signs, there might be negative consequences. Those employees could face severance. I had a boss one time tell me that he didn't want to see me out marching in gay pride parades. It happens. Additionally, there's the risk of physical harm. It wouldn't surprise me at all to hear that a group of MAGA brown shirts had descended on some protesters and tried to beat them up. And you have to remember that Americans are armed to the teeth. Guns are everywhere. In my state, you can carry a gun in your pocket without a permit or a license. But I think the biggest reason that Americans are not out protesting in the streets about Trump's policies is that they agree with them. I know that sounds incredible, but it's true. This is an aggrieved group of people who do not want the nation sharing its wealth with other countries. They feel like America has been taken advantage of by other countries. They are tired of seeing us give away our money and our resources to other countries. They don't want people from other countries coming over here to take advantage of the benefits and the opportunities that we have. They don't want to share. Back in World War I or World War II, you would have called these people isolationists. They don't want to get involved. They don't care what happens to Ukraine. They don't care what happens to Taiwan. They don't care what happens to Europe. They simply want to keep everything to themselves. In order to understand the American mindset, you have to know something about the way Americans live, because it is dramatically different than the way people in Europe live. In Europe, people read books. They go to museums. They travel. They're exposed to other cultures, other languages, other lifestyles. They're much more cosmopolitan in their perception of how the world exists and how we all get along with each other. Here in the States, it's completely the opposite. If you watched American TV commercials, you would think that we spend our discretionary time out rock climbing or kissing under the stars or roping cattle or doing any number of things that keep us engaged with each other. The fact is, we don't live like that at all. In America, people adore technology, and they have been seduced by media. And by media, I don't mean the news media, I mean the medium itself. Television, movies, the internet, video games. They spend a great deal of their discretionary time consuming media. And the problem with America's fascination with technology and its adoration of media is that it can be very isolating. For instance, in America, you don't have to go to an office building to work anymore. You can work from home. You don't have to go to the grocery store or to the department store to pick up your goods. You can just have them delivered. You don't have to go out to a restaurant to enjoy a meal. Have it delivered to your house. You don't have to go to a movie theater to watch a movie. Just stream it on your computer or your TV. So Americans spend a great deal of time home alone. They are not exposed to a multiplicity of cultures or languages or experiences. They're home alone. And because this technology allows them to do it, they can curate their information sources so that they only hear the information that they want to hear. In other words, their biases are confirmed over and over and over. So in Europe, where you have large groups of people living in close proximity to each other, with a variety of cultures, a variety of languages, and a variety of worldviews, here in the United States, you tend to have people living in silos and echo chambers of confirmation bias. Is it any wonder that Americans live in such extreme conditions? There's no middle ground in this country anymore. You're either extreme left or extreme right. The middle ground has been eliminated by the technology that enables people to be alone all the time. We've basically become a nation of angry sociopaths. And that's why people don't get out and protest, because they agree with what Trump is doing. Trump appeals to their confirmation bias. The country is like an open wound, and Trump is quite literally the infection that is exploiting that open wound. So if you were wondering why Americans don't protest, I think that's why.
Hello brothers and sisters, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you are doing super great from wherever you watching me from. I'm your host and presenter Agent Stories. Welcome to the channel. Definitely you've watched the video and you have something to say. You have an input in regards to this. So please put it down in the comment section. And I also have something to say in regards to this. I believe that it's important for us to talk and discuss about these issues. First of all, the outrage some white Americans express after discovering that black Americans are not the primarily beneficiaries of food stamps. That's the SNAP, speaks to a deeper psychological and historical and structural phenomena, which is much deep into race. And this all is happening in the United States. Now, beneath the surface, this anger reveals a subconscious belief that government aid is something white people should not need, and that poverty is somehow or expected or deserved when evidence contradicts these myths, showing that white Americans in raw numbers rely more on welfare. Many express a crisis of identity. Their reaction is not simply about food stamps. It's about the collapse of a historical narrative that positioned whiteness as inherently economically superior and morally deserving. This discomfort exposes how racial myths have long shaped American understanding of class, poverty, and public assistance. Also, the roots of these phenomena stretch back to slavery and Reconstruction. I'll explain. For centuries, white Americans defined themselves in oppositions to blackness. To be white was to be free. To be white was to be self-sufficient. And to be white was to be superior. What about to be black? What was to be black? To be black was to be enslaved, to be dependent, to be inferior. This binary became a foundational part of American identity. With the rise of welfare program in the 20th century, political actors cynically weaponized this narrative, rebranding public assistance as something heavily associated with black Americans. Ronald Reagan's welfare queen myth is a classic example of this. Despite being drastically false, it entrenched this perception that welfare was a black problem. Thus, when many white Americans later learned that their own demographic receives more food stamps, the revelation shattered a carefully constructed racial illusion. The anger also stems from what sociologists like Joe Fagin calls the white racial frame. This is a worldview in which white success is seen as natural, while black advancement is viewed as suspicious or undeserving. When white Americans struggle economically, it is experienced as a violation of what they have been taught to expect. They feel entitled to prosperity, believing that the system was designed for their benefit. So when data shows that they rely more heavily on welfare, even though they have long condemned black people for supposedly doing the same, they feel betrayed. Their reaction is not only emotional, but it is existential. This reveals that whiteness does not guarantee sub-economic stability. The fear here is not just material. The fear is deprivation. It is the dread of losing symbolic superiority. Another layer of this collapse is the American dream. Yes, for generations, whiteness functioned as a psychological safety net. Even when white person was poor, they could still claim superiority over black people. When economic decline hit white working class communities through deindustrialization, wage stagnation, and the loss of stable employment, many found themselves in the same socioeconomic positions as those they were taught to look down upon. Welfare dependence, therefore, becomes shameful, not because of the self-assistance itself, but because it erases the racial distinction they relied upon for their identity and dignity. Their anger is projected outwards, towards the government, towards the minority, towards political elites. They blame for their perceived demotion. Also, historically, elites reinforced racial division to prevent poor whites and poor blacks from uniting. By convincing poor white people they are above or they were above black people, even when both groups suffered materially, they preserved the racial hierarchy. They discovered that white people constitute the largest welfare-receiving population, which threatens this strategy. And this reveals that class exploitation affects all working people, not just minorities. However, instead of turning their frustration towards the structures that produce economic inequality, many white Americans direct their anger at black people. Clinging to old narratives, the questions become, if we are struggling like them, then what does being white mean anymore? It is not about food stamps. It is about identity laws. There is also a psychological component rooted in cognitive dissonance. Yes, when individuals hold deeply ingrained beliefs such as white people work harder or black people are lazy, evidence to the contrary creates internal conflict. To resolve this discomfort, instead of changing their beliefs, many double down on stereotypes or conspiracy theory. They claim that statistics are manipulated or minorities are scarcely benefiting more. This protects their worldview and comforts their sense of racial entitlement. The truth that poverty is structural and not racial becomes too painful to accept because it implies that whiteness offers no inherent economic guarantee. And finally, you understand that this phenomenon reflects the unraveling of racial capitalism. The American economy was built on extracting values from black labor while promising white workers social status rather than material wealth. Today, both groups suffer under the same decline system, though not equally. As white Americans confront economic hardship, they are forced to face the truth black Americans have long understood. The state prioritizes wealth, not race, and workers existing primarily to be exploited. The fury of white Americans who learn they rely on more food stamps is fury of awakening. The realization that the system they thought privileged them has abandoned them. The moment holds revolutionary potential. It can either lead to solidarity across racial lines, or it can fuel deeper resentment, denial, and reactionary politics. The direction chosen will still determine whether America moves towards healing or further fragmentation. I'm your host and presenter, Jindok Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.